All right. Good evening or afternoon or whenever you guys watch this. I'm sorry I won't be able to make class tomorrow morning. I have some onboarding I have to do for the new gig that isn't very flexible. So thank you guys for being flexible with this. All right, I wanted to start where we left off last class, talking about emotional intelligence. So, emotional intelligence is the ability to process emotional information and use it in reasoning and other cognitive activities. This is something we all have, whether they're good at it or really good at it, or maybe struggling with it a little bit. It impacts all of us. There are a lot of components to emotional intelligence. These include perceiving emotion, using emotions to help with cognition, understanding emotions, or the ability to manage emotions. I'm just looking at my watch real quick to make sure I stay on track and on time. Try not to go over. So people with higher EQ scores tend to be less aggressive and have fewer behavioral problems, which, as you can imagine, is a real positive. At work, people with higher EQ scores better manage stress and are more effective team players and team leaders. So this is tied to money, which we love. So having a high emotional intelligence is a really good thing. It is important to note that this is a young area of research. And there are a few schools that are starting to implement this into their programs, which is really neat. So even like elementary schools, they're starting to have conversations about what this looks like and what emotional intelligence is and how to treat other people. So really a cool idea to start looking into. Um, but it is a young area of research and not quite part of the curriculum everywhere. Let's see if I can move on to the next one. Maybe bring the volume down because I bet this is going to be loud.
Juicy, fresh beef,
Good ad.
healthy Swiss and cheddar cheeses, thick cut bacon, and zesty.
Oh.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I am a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple of years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house. I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is the sure you come back at 10 because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the no thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
There we go. So that's a little bit of Brene Brown, kind of a nugget of emotional intelligence, right? Thinking about blame, thinking about our relationship with blame, um, taking a beat is always a good idea. Um, I liked her thing a lot. Sorry, I tried to mute myself but I think that muted the screen for you guys. So sorry if there was a little blip in there where it didn't talk. But yeah, Steve was essentially to blame, I'm sure, for her choice to have that second cup of coffee by keeping her up late. Um, Moving on to the end of, I think this is 9.2, cultural intelligence. So this is the ability to function effectively in situations characterized by cultural diversity. So there are multiple components here: metacognitive cultural intelligence, cognitive cultural intelligence, motivational cultural intelligence, and behavioral cultural intelligence. This is also a young area of research, but it integrates more information in instead of just the emotional intelligence. It also thinks about cultural perspectives and brings that into play. So the key takeaways, right? We have this theory of multiple intelligences. We went through those 8 specific intelligences last time. We have that augmented theory of successful intelligence. We have our strengths and our weaknesses. And we have to figure out how to use our analytical, creative, and practical abilities to adapt and achieve our goals. Talked about emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence. Now I want to dive into chapter 9.3. So defining language, describing its components, the role of Broca's area, Wernicke's area, how children learn language, and then talk a little bit about what we know about language and communication in non-human animals. So just briefly, language is the ability to communicate through spoken, written, or signed words. There are a lot of different components to language. So we have phonemes. Those are the elementary units of language, the smallest little things that make words. So sit has 3 phonemes, S-I-T. Morphemes are the smallest unit of meaning in a language, right? So instead of a letter, refinish, right? The re means something, so that's called a morpheme. And then we have syntax. So that's the set of rules by which we construct sentences. So bringing all these words together into something that makes sense using grammar and syntax to make sure that other people can understand it. And it's important to note that the grammar and syntax of languages is different from one language to another. We speak English, but if you guys speak another Romance language, that's usually pretty easy to pick up, like Italian, Spanish, French. Those are pretty similar, right? They'll have a Latin base. But if you're learning something like Japanese or Chinese, it's going to be a little bit difficult because that syntax is so different across those types of languages. And then we have contextual information as well. So that's the information that surrounds a language. It's the knowledge, gestures, tone of voice, all of that. I think it's about 70% of communication is not just the words, but the context that surrounds language. So lots of additional information there. Language is so diverse. There are over 6,000 languages worldwide, and structurally they can be really, really different. Chomsky really enjoyed some of his work. He argued that all languages share basic elements, which is called a universal grammar. He talked about humans having this predisposition to learn grammar, not like a built-in specific language, but this natural ability to pick up on grammatical rules. That's something that you don't really see in animals. I do want to go through this, not a lot of it, but just a little bit to talk about the complexity of sign language, which will come into play in our next slides.
The course of this disease has been changed in a generation. What can happen in the next decade or the next 2 decades?
Juicy fresh beef, melty Swiss and cheddar cheeses, thick cut bacon, and zesty.
Hey signers, did you know that changing one part of an ASL sign can change the meaning of the sign? In today's video, I am going to teach you how to do just that with directional signs. So let's learn how to sign directional verbs. Each sign is made up of what we call the 5 parameters of sign: hand shape, palm orientation, location, movement, and non-manual signals. For directional signs, you will be noticing the change of movement of these signs and the direction that you are wanting a sign to move. For example, the sign ask. I can sign ask you, but then turn it around to ask me. I can then ask everybody, or you can ask me tons of questions. So whenever you are learning these signs, remember that you can move these directional signs.
Hey, how about you? You want to play me one-on-one?
Oh my
Let's go.
goodness.
Move. Move. You have flat O hands that are put upside down, and they can move in all different directions. Move. Help. Help. This used to be the old sign for help, like you were helping somebody across the street. And then it changed into this. You can also do this directionally. Helping you, helping me, or helping everybody, or helping somebody else. Help. Give.
Okay. So you can see that there's a lot of movement, right? There's a lot of different things that come into play for ASL, which is pretty interesting. Let me just peek at my next set of slides. Okay, so this goes into it a little bit more. So children are born to hearing. Non-signing parents typically do not experience language during their early years. If parents hear, they have to learn ASL to begin to communicate with those children who are deaf. And that can be quite difficult because it's so complex, and because of something called a critical period, which we're going to talk about shortly. It's very difficult to learn that new language, especially when it's complex as sign language. And so parents will make mistakes, and it's actually pretty cool the way that children who are born deaf learn. They actually become better at the language than their parents do, even though their parents are the ones teaching them. They may not see sign language anywhere else, but they become quite good at it, which is interesting. So they learn and they become better than their parents, even though their parents are the only people influencing them. That being said, natively deaf children who learn signing after age 9 do not learn sign language, master basic words, or become as fluent as native signers. It's just if there's that critical period where learning is possible, there's all this plasticity, and then once that goes away, it becomes quite hard. And late learners show less right hemisphere brain activity in areas that are related to sign language reading. There is a lot of talk about cochlear implants or not. More than 90% of all deaf children are born to hearing parents who often seek these cochlear implants. Deaf culture advocates object to this intervention, and the National Association of the Deaf argues that deafness is not a disability because native signers are not linguistically disabled. They can't hear, right? But they're still able to communicate, and they're linguistically they're whole. They have this whole experience and they can communicate just as good as we can, just in a different way. So there's kind of an input layer of information, and then our brain is kind of like a computer processing system. There's all these hidden layers. You'll hear something, and then you'll have this output layer that goes into it. So there's a grammar here that takes place, and we learn grammar. I mean, we pick it up in school and they teach us like an object and a noun and how everything fits together. But what really happens is we hear things, our brain kind of figures it out, and then it outputs things and it learns how to process them, and it changes the weight of these hidden layers. And don't worry, this is a little complicated, so there's no test on this, but I just think it's very fascinating, right? And so there's a statistical thing that happens kind of behind the scenes, and that's kind of what's driving a lot of the things that we see with deaf children learning to speak better than their parents, which is kind of fascinating, right? So if their parents are correct 70% of the time and they're incorrect 30% of the time, these brains, these people will be able to figure out, oh, okay, well, I see this pattern and this pattern. Even if they're not consciously thinking about patterns, they can identify them, learn from them. There's this underlying universal grammar system we have built in, and they may be correct 90% of the time, 95% of the time, even though they've only been exposed to someone who is correct 70% of the time. So really a fascinating phenomenon. So we talked about critical periods, and I want to kind of wrap back around to this. A critical period is a time in which learning can occur easily. So psychological scientists used to believe that for any language learning, the critical period lasts between infancy and puberty, after which learning language is difficult, if not impossible. Um, so most recent research indicates that the change in language learning ability over time is more gradual than previously thought. We used to think that there was just this big drop off, but that's not the case. Um, and then plasticity is the brain's ability to develop these neural connections. That's going to be really high when you're young, right? When you're learning all these new things and your brain is creating all these neurons. Um, Eventually, your brain goes through a pruning process where it says, "Oh, I'm not using this, I'm not using that," right? I haven't played piano since I was 10 years old, and those neurons kind of like redirect themselves, right? Um, so English proficiency, you can see the college, high school graduation, all that stuff there. You can see that when people immigrate, and they're picking up this new language, that it's very difficult to achieve college or high school level proficiency, and that becomes even more tough as you get older. Um, and it's kind of like sad to bring up, but a lot of research on critical periods has also looked at people who like get kidnapped. So they'll find somebody in a basement and they've lived there for like 5 years, like super tragic, but maybe they didn't have the opportunity to speak in 5 years, or maybe they were like a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old when they got kidnapped, and like reintegrating them into society and trying to get them to speak again is quite challenging. And some people, if they've been kidnapped or taken for a long period of time, actually can't produce language, and they have to like navigate the world with diminished ability to speak, which is quite interesting. Very, very, very sad, but there's a lot that has come out of those stories and a lot that's been learned from studying those individuals. So childhood is a critical period for mastering certain aspects of language. People who learn a second language as adults usually speak it with the accent of their native language, and they have a difficult time mastering the new grammar. So here we're looking at immigration again. So age at arrival in years, and you can see that percentage correct on a grammar test begins to drop off, right? It becomes very difficult the older you are to be able to pick up on that second language. Um, Children exposed to low quality language, such as 4-year-olds in classrooms with 3-year-olds, or some children from impoverished homes, often display less language skill. So there is something to be said to talking to your kids like they're adults, right? Giving them that high quality language, the ability to learn more and hear more complex grammar is very valuable. That's going to help develop their skills. Switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about the biology of language. So for most people, the left hemisphere is specialized for language. This becomes quite interesting. It's a little bit of a confounding variable when you look at memory studies, especially in older adults. So younger adults are more likely to look at an image and memorize it, whereas older adults are more likely to look at an image and try to put a name to it. So when they're putting this word out there, this association between this image that they're going to use to like pull back a word of what it meant before, like that connection there, they're using that language, it can activate that left hemisphere. And so we oftentimes will see lateralization effects in memory studies for older adults, which is kind of fascinating. Hard when you tell people to do the task and they're doing something a little bit different, but the way that we process information does change as we get older. So Broca's area is near the motor cortex. It is important in language production or speaking, right? You move your lips, your tongue, your mouth, like everything kind of comes together, your vocal cords, you're pushing sound out. And that's going to be Broca's area. Wernicke's area is near the auditory cortex, and it's important for language comprehension or hearing. These are really great test questions, by the way, so just be thinking about that. And then we have aphasia. That's a condition in which language functions are severely impaired. I want to show you guys a few examples about what these are like. So this is Broca's aphasia.
Can you tell us your name?
Mike Caputo.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
I was 7 years ago,
Okay.
and
what did you used to do?
well, worked Autodesk, seven sales and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there? when you turn your
That's
head?
my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech.
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
All right. And so why don't you work now?
I do.
And what do you do now?
Voices of Hope, aphasia.
And what is Voices of Hope?
Peterburg, and Dr. Hinckley, and myself, founder for me, and members,
As you guys can tell, it's very difficult for him to produce speech. You can see he had that right-sided stroke with his right arm kind of resting there. It looks like he lost some of that motor production, which tracks, right? He lost that motor production in that right arm and also kind of in that area, the same area of the brain, very close. He lost some of the ability to speak, right? So it becomes very difficult for him to speak. So that's Broca's aphasia, Broca's area. And then the other one I want to show you is Wernicke's area. Wernicke's aphasia.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talked with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. They'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We
get to
will
Juneau.
store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
With the iPad that we were doing.
So you can see he's able to produce speech pretty naturally, but there's just like a little bit of a weird thing going on where he's plugging in words, but not quite saying what he means to say, right? A little bit of a maybe comprehension sort of thing going on, hearing sort of thing going on. So that's Wernicke's aphasia. So when do we learn language? I want to go back to a little bit of a developmental view here. So receptive language is infants' ability to understand what is said to them. That begins around 4 months. And then there's productive or production language. So that's an infant's ability to produce words. That begins around 10 months. You get some babbling around 7 months. Goo, random sounds, right? And then around 10 months, you'll get this babbling that resembles household language. So like mama, they're not going to say complicated things, but they might start saying things that sound more like words. At about a year or 12 months, you'll get one-word speech like kitty. At 24 months, you get this two-word speech like get ball. They'll link those two words together. And then after 24 months, you get this rapid development into complete sentences. And then they're just going crazy, talking all the time. Lots of why questions. So learning begins even before birth. Newborns are already aware of the phonemes that they usually hear, of what they're used to hearing. There's all kinds of different languages out there, so they might stare a little bit longer in studies at people who are speaking with phonemes that they aren't used to hearing. Babbling is intentional vocalizations that lack specific meaning, so that begins at 7 months, like we said. And then about 1 year, babbling occurs primarily in language or languages that they are learning. So they could make any sort of noise, right? They're really going to absorb. They're like a sponge. But eventually they reach that critical period where they can't make noises that they don't hear as much, right? So that's when they're going to develop an accent, is when that goes away. Children who are exposed to sign language babble in sign language, which is kind of interesting. So they might make certain signs. I have a friend who taught her kid the all done, and I wish I could remember what it was, but she taught her all done, and so she'll do the all done sign. She's not much of a talker, but she likes to use her hands to talk. Anyways, pronunciations become increasingly accurate between the ages of 1 and 3. Children can exhibit overextension of concepts, like they might own a dog, and so they're driving down the road and they say doggy, doggy, and it's a cow, right? And you have to correct them and then kind of mold that a little bit. But they overextend the concepts they do know because it's what they know, right? And they're trying to apply it to the big, crazy world that we live in. Children also use contextual language, so they understand the context of things, of what's going on around them. Um, Looking at animals, this is kind of interesting. Non-human animals have a wide variety of communication systems. Male songbirds sing to attract mates and protect their territory. There are chimpanzees that use facial expressions and actions to convey aggression. Honeybees dance to attract other bees to food sources. Vervet monkeys use specific sounds to communicate specific meanings. So it's not communicating in the way that we're, our complex way of communicating, but it is communication, right? And they are able to talk to each other. Efforts to teach non-human animals language have been met with limited success. So, the most proficient non-human language speaker is Kanzi, who is a Bonobbo. Um, his language abilities resemble humans, right? So, there's an elementary syntax that Kanzi understands. They use symbols to comment on social interactions. He learned faster when he was younger, and now that's not as fast now that he's older. Learns by observation, so is able to pick up on things that they see. However, there are things about Kanzi that are not truly generative, if you will. So they don't have a true language like humans do. Kanzi generates very few new phrases, right? He's likely to repeat things that apply, but less likely to string new things together. His syntax is at the level of a 2-year-old human. He takes a long time to learn each new word. And the language is focused mostly on food and pleasure, because that's what the monkey is geared after. Not a lot of intellectual pursuit there, but that's okay, right? Food is good. I thought this was a little bit of an interesting take on animals and how they communicate. So we'll dive into that.
Performing on the biggest stage in the world was just one step in my journey.
Hi, our Nancy Giles has talked with people from all walks of life, but she's never been in conversation with anyone quite like Stella.
Get out of your water, Dad.
Anyone who's ever had one knows this much. Dogs have plenty to say. Which begs the question, what if dogs could talk? I mean, with actual words. Now we could have an answer, thanks to Christina Hunger and Stella. What gave you the idea to teach your dog to talk?
It was all my work as a speech therapist.
Hunger is a speech and language pathologist.
I was working with kids every day who used communication devices to talk, and I was also working with toddlers who were developing their language.
These devices are called AAC, Augmentative and Alternative Communication. By pressing buttons on a screen, people with speech disorders are able to express themselves.
Utensils. Spoon. Yeah, I'll get you a spoon.
When I brought Stella home, I just saw these insane similarities between what she was doing to communicate to us and what toddlers do right before they start using words.
Stella, now 2 years old, is a Catahoula and Australian cattle dog mix. Christina and her husband, Jake McClunky, found her through an ad on Craigslist.
In the first days that I was with Stella, she was a little puppy, and I ordered some recordable buttons right away. I started with outside, play, and water. About a month in, she started saying her first word, and from there, we just kept adding vocabulary as we went.
So Stella's board grew. No treats needed.
So that's cool. We won't watch the entire video, but I did want to share that with you guys. I've seen another video, but this one kind of explains it a little more in depth. There's one where they have a button for beach, but the button for beach broke. And so the dogs would hit play, water, outside, And like to me, that signifies that they have a concept of what beach is and they know. And so even when that button won't work, they're pressing the buttons that are associated with it to try and get that idea through. So very entertaining and very interesting to see the capability of animals to learn language, to understand language, and then to communicate back with us. We're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about linguistic determinism. This hypothesis is that language determines basic ideas, so there's a little bit of reciprocity there. There's evidence from bilingual speakers that suggests that people think differently in different languages. And bilingual parents will often switch language to express emotions. I don't know if anybody's gotten yelled at in another language. That might be more natural for your mom or dad. So, they might switch over and start talking at you really fast. But bilingual children exhibit enhanced social skills by being better able to shift to understanding others' perspectives. So there is a positive side to that. As well. So words influence but do not determine thinking, right? So determinism is maybe a little bit of a strong approach to that, but there is an influence that words have on thinking. For example, colors are seen in the same way, but native language is used to classify and remember them. So perceived differences expand as names are assigned. So for me, I don't know for you guys how into colors you are, but for me, there's a green on the left and a blue on the right, and maybe a teal somewhere in there. But as you begin to name these blues, right? Maybe one of them is a cerulean blue. Maybe there's I think that's all the teals I know, or all the blues I know, but now I have a green, a teal, a cerulean blue, and a blue, right? So I can identify more colors. And the same is true of things like snow, right? So if you live in a place where there's a lot of snow, some languages have like 6 words for snow because they encounter it so much. And so the environment shapes the language, but the language also shapes our thoughts, right? So there's this whole complex world out there that that can be developed. There's some other things to think about here, right? Language does impact our thinking, right? So if we know, for example, we talked about emotional intelligence. If we know more words to identify emotions, that goes a long way. That's going to change our vocabulary, which is in turn going to change our thoughts and the way that we process things. So a lot of positive things can come from that. This is something that's really, really cool. So if you guys have ever wondered what English sounds like to non-English speakers, I want to share that with you. It starts off slow, so we're going to skip.
Parking here.
Edson.
Oh, hey, Natson. What's in a hash shoot?
Hatting in.
Lining, panning, barbeting, the minimus, aim?
Mnemonic. Let's start with the head node.
It's carpetable. Hashing guards, actually. Tracy Paladin having it since like 4-day while I was a soap in an ottoman or something. It was palatable.
Tracy was a Normicon?
Yeah, Ashton part though. Mandolin, that older combing dorm dot. Yeah, that heart, the actual placency, and over it was draped like 6 or something. I mean, strange me out, and it was palatable. It's chalked over now, but hey, did you letter after it?
No, only stone pieces, bud pieces, and HP pieces.
What about the acorn pieces?
Kind of part he's hoarding his packing. Is he having it older?
Older with a leak, yeah.
Right, I heard you wouldn't treat that without a Parkinson's.
For the Parkinson's, it was actually Lancaster. Shim was the part of it that I didn't.
So I'll let you guys listen more if you're kind of curious, but I've always wondered kind of what English sounds like to non-English speakers. And so what this person did is they kind of took all those morphemes that we talked about and they just chopped them up and then practiced saying those things and they spoke English, right? It's all the morphemes that we hear in some words, right? You could hear some words like since, but not in any coherent way, right? So that brings me from speech segmentation into language development. So children learn grammar as they discern patterns in the language they hear, right? So they're going to learn different words, right? And you'll be able to pick out those words and hear those segments. An example of that, maybe in Spanish, right? Casa is house. So maybe you're like listening to a sentence and you'll pick up on that segment. But you segment language, right? Until you understand all the different parts of it. And then you're able to get like a whole picture. Human infants display the ability to learn statistical aspects of human speech. We kind of talked about that before, but they'll pick up on words that are said more often, right? Infant brains discern word breaks and analyze which syllables most often go together. So they may say, yeases, right? Because they know that to make gooses. They may know that to make a word plural, there's S at the end, right? And so they say, oh, there's a goose, there's gooses, right? And that's not correct, it's geese. But they'll learn, which syllables go together, they'll associate meanings with them. And that might be an example of something that's normally true, but that's kind of an atypical situation where it isn't true. But they'll learn and go from there. Human infants have a remarkable capacity to soak up language, but the particular language they will learn will reflect their unique interactions with others, right? So we can learn anything. But if you really love science, you get into science and all of a sudden you know all the science words. Or maybe you're super into graphic design or business, right? And you learn that language. And that's gonna reflect in their ability to speak, right? You're gonna kind of focus in on that area, and that's what you're going to be able to produce. Key takeaways, definition of language is here. We talked about those phonemes and morphemes, syntax. And then recent research suggests there's no single critical period of language learning, but the earlier language occurs, the easier it is. We talked about Broca's area, Wernicke's area, so that's always interesting. Language learning begins even before birth. So an infant usually produces their first year at about 1 year of age. And although other animals communicate, only humans appear to have language. So very fascinating. I have a class activity, but I think it's best in person. So we will resume on Friday with the class activity and dive into the next chapter. Thank you guys again for bearing with me online. Hopefully this works well. I will send a Google Forms. It's going to have some questions on it, and that's going to count for your attendance on class on Monday. So thank you so much for being flexible. I look forward to seeing you guys on Friday. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm going to be in the classroom from 8:15 until 8:55 tomorrow. If you guys would like to swing by, if you end up having questions about the textbook or anything, please feel free to drop by. I've got a meeting from 9 to probably about 10. So if you wanted to swing by my office around 10, I'm also going to be available. We're always available via Zoom or email. So feel free to reach out. I hope that you guys had a great long weekend, and I look forward to seeing you again on Friday. Bye.